Hi, welcome to Resilience, Getting Through Stressful Times. My name is Alyssa Zilberschlag. I'm the Director of Conflict Resolution and Anti-Bias Initiatives at the New Jersey State Bar Foundation. This is a modified version of the interactive webinar that we have called Resilience, Getting Through Stressful Times. If you want to be a part of our full interactive webinar, you can click on the Click Here to Sign Up for Educator emails link on our SEL webinar and online content page on our website at www.njsbf.org. What I will share with you today can be applied directly to your own life. You can use this information to understand yourself better and to increase your own resilience. This information can also be used to help you understand your students better. When we understand our students, we can be more effective allies and confidants. Lately, a lot has been asked of us to help them. Hopefully, this webinar can guide you in finding out how to do this better. So what is resilience? There's been so much talk about it lately, and there's actually a lot of research out there on resilience. There are definite conclusions while some research is still ongoing. Because there's so much research out there, there are so many definitions of resilience, but most of them center around two ideas: adversity and positive adaptation. There's one woman named Anne Maston. She's a leading researcher on resilience, and she defines resilience as a pattern of positive adaptation that happens during or after experiencing adversity or a significant risk. What she talks about is how ordinary and common resilience is. We often think it's some out there idea that we could never actually really get more of, but we actually can. And so many of us already have it inside of ourselves already. The second researcher's definition that I want to share is a woman named Karen Ravitch. She comes out of the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And she talks about resilience as the ability to bounce back from adversity. And she adds a second piece where she says it is also the ability to grow from challenges. And I really like that because it's a very forward-thinking mindset. And that's really what resilience is about. The third definition I want to share with you is a woman named Rachel Yehuda. She's a doctor who studies intergenerational outside medicine. And she has a nice long definition of resiliency, but what she does is she boils down resiliency to the following statement: you take a licking and keep on ticking. And that comes from that Timex commercial all the way back from the 50s. I remember seeing that in the 80s when I was growing up. I'm a child of the 80s. So science has taught us that there are two sides of resilience: the nature side, the genes that we're born with. We all know people who can experience difficulty or trauma and bounce right back from it. And we know others who just melt when difficult times happen. And they have a really hard time picking themselves back up again and moving forward. And then there's the nurture side, the experiences and environments that we choose, the things that we can do consciously to increase our levels of resiliency. And there are things that we can do. We do have agency to increase our levels of resiliency. So what can we do? Karen Ravitch, the researcher I mentioned earlier, she attributes 7 variables to resilience. These variables are the things we can do consciously to change our behaviors and to become more resilient, grow, and learn to increase your levels of resiliency. And these 7 variables are self-awareness, self-regulation, impulse control, empathy, optimism, self-efficacy, and connection. So let's work through each of these 7 variables. The first one is self-awareness. Self-awareness is really about knowing what your thoughts are, and it's really being able to do that self-talk in your head and hearing that self-talk happen, both the good and the bad. What are you actually thinking? Self-awareness is also about your reactions and tracking them to situations. What triggers you? And are your reactions helping or harming you? The third piece of self-awareness is your physiology, being aware of what's going on inside your body. So when I get stressed, I feel it a lot in my neck. And I can tell that I'm feeling stressed and I am aware of myself. And then I can do things like I can roll my head, I can give myself a little back rub, I can have my kids give me a back rub, and I can help bring myself back to a better place physiologically. But I first have to be aware that that's where I'm feeling that stress. The next piece of self-awareness is strengths awareness, knowing what your strengths are and how to leverage them, and knowing what your weaknesses are and how to manage them. So one of my strengths is humor, and you can usually find something amusing in anything. And there's this great expression that I heard recently. It says, time plus tragedy equals comedy. And I've really been finding that that is true for me. Right away, immediately, things aren't naturally funny, but with some time, things can get a little bit humorous. I meme right now. And then conversely, one of my weaknesses is self-regulation. And I definitely have been having a harder time controlling what I eat lately. And so self-regulation is definitely not a big strength of mine, and it's actually pretty common. Not a lot of people have self-regulation, and if you do, you're lucky. So the next and last of self-awareness is emotional awareness and being able to track your emotions. Can you identify what you're actually feeling? And there are a lot of activities out there for students to do this. We have some at the Bar Foundation in our social emotional character development guide, but there's also a ton of information and resources on the web on how to track your feelings and your emotions for students. The next variable that contributes to resiliency is self-regulation. And this is the ability to change your thoughts and your emotions and your physiology. So the first thing that you really need is mental agility variables. This means that you're able to take control of your own thinking. And how do you do that? And you need this in order to be able to self-regulate. So how do you do it? The first piece is perspective taking, being able to see things from other people's perspectives. It can really help you to have a much more well-rounded view, and it can even calm you down to be able to do some perspective taking and understand where another person is coming from. The second piece is problem solving skills. This diminishes frustrations and helps to handle daily challenges and develop strategies. The third piece is good intellectual functioning. This is very interesting to me. Did you know that people with higher IQs and EQs, or emotional intelligence, actually have higher levels of resiliency? So I found that really interesting. These mental agility variables matter when it comes to resiliency. And then lastly, regarding self-regulation, there is goal setting that has to occur in order to be able to self-regulate. You have to be able to control yourself in order to reach goals, and having goals is a very important factor in resilience. So let's think of some practical examples of self-regulation that we can do during stressful times. So the first thing that we can do is watch feel-good videos or shows, not the ones that are more of doomsday, but the ones that make us feel good. We can exercise, going for a walk. We could use YouTube videos or meet virtually with friends or trainers to work out. We can meditate. There are a lot of meditation apps and free meditation videos online. You can even start your day out with a breathing exercise or end your day that way as well. The next piece is self-talk. Saying the things that will get you through these difficult times, making sure that your self-talk is positive. And the last is virtual gatherings. People are really getting together now much more. I've been actually meeting with a group of families in my town every Saturday night, and we've been doing virtual karaoke. So that's been really interesting, where one family will sing a song and then we'll mute everybody else. And it's been really, really fun to do. My family and I actually last week, we just did Eat It by Weird Al Yankovic, and that went over really well. So that can be very, very fun, and it can be a really good way to regulate yourself from all feelings that are happening, the feel-good things. The next variable of resilience is impulse control. And again, Karen Ravitch, I like what she says here. We all have impulses to do things and say things that are not in our best interest or kind to others. Resilience doesn't require that you stop having these impulses, but it does require you to stop yourself from acting on every impulse you have. So I really like that, because what she talks about a lot in some of her literature is that impulse control can be learned. And that's really good news. So even if you or your students are impulsive, you can learn simple strategies that will help you handle situations better. This is one strategy that we have in our social emotional character development guide. And this strategy can really help you to just stop and check yourself. So I like to do this because lately I have been eating a lot of cookies. So what I do start cookies is I stop. I stop what I'm doing and I think, what could I do about this? I could eat these cookies right now, or I could eat them later, or I could not eat them. And then I decide, I make a decision, will eating these cookies make my situation better or worse? And then I make a choice. And this choice is very personal to everybody. Everybody makes different choices. What I tend to do is I tend to choose to eat a certain number. So maybe I'll only eat 2 or 3 or maybe even 4, but I'll stop and I bag. So it's very important to check your impulses, to stop, to think, to decide, and then make a choice. Impulse control is really also about moderation. And it's about moderation in so many different ways. So for example, watching the news right now, we may have impulses to just continuously watch the news, but it's really important to just maybe designate a couple of times a day to watch the news. For example, I read the news in bed when I wake up, and then after work, I'll sit down and I'll watch a news program for maybe half an hour. And that's my news. Because if I just watch too much, it's too much. So moderation really is key. The next thing is with TV shows. You know, we could sit down and we could all day, but we really have to moderate that, as well as potato chips. And self-isolation, what do I mean by that? So some people do tend to self-isolate when things get difficult, and moderating that self-isolation and making a point to connect with others is really important. And we'll be talking about that more when we get to the connection section. The next is screen time. We could really get lost and go down a rabbit hole with FaceTime and Snapchat and Instagram and all of them. There's just so much. So really moderate our screen time when we're on our phones. And then lastly is vices. So what I mean by that is eating or drinking. I mean, lately there's even alcohol delivery services to help people through this time. So vices, controlling them and moderating those vices is also really, really important. The next component of resilience that we're going to talk about is empathy. And this is the ability to understand other people's feelings and perspectives because you can imagine yourself in their shoes. When expressing empathy, you feel with someone. And people don't always associate empathy with resilience because it's really about thinking about other people. But the way that empathy is connected to resilience is because when you think about other people, when you express empathy, and when you feel with someone, you're creating more positive relationships. And those positive relationships eventually lead to resilience. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that someone's feeling or take on or over-identify with a person's feelings. You can empathize with someone even if you don't agree with them. And in certain social justice circles, there's been some new language around this. And the language is about accompanying and witnessing other people instead of being in their shoes. So I really like this, accompany and witness, and this image, that image that it brings to me of empathy is very helpful for me in understanding what empathy actually is and how I can be the best empathetic person. Empathy also requires you to label feelings like this. And as leaders, as people who are in charge of students and classes, it's important to be able to empathize with what people are going through by identifying and labeling their feelings, by giving them a name. It really can help people to understand themselves better, and it can increase those positive relationships. The next component I want to talk about is optimism. And many people think of optimism as the glass is half full, and that's not totally accurate. The true definition of optimism is knowing that there will be problems and knowing you have the agency to fix them. And that's really, really important when we think about resiliency, because it's a very forward-thinking mindset, a future-based mindset. And optimism is actually part of resilience. You have to have it, and it drives other variables. It also helps you to see stressors as challenges and not threats. So optimism is also a really big part of resilience. The next component is self-efficacy. And this is the belief that we have in our own abilities, specifically our ability to meet the challenges ahead of us and complete a task successfully. So how do you express self-efficacy? The first thing is you do have to know what your strengths are, and this requires self-awareness. A lot of these components require self-awareness. Actually, all of them require self-awareness. What are your strengths? The second piece is having a growth mindset. And you may be familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, but really a growth mindset is being able to understand that it's the challenges that make us grow. And instead of saying, oh, I can't do that, we can say, oh, I can't do that yet. It's that mindset of yet. The next piece of self-efficacy is a belief that you can master your own environment. And there is an accountability strategy that I want to share with you about that. And in this strategy, what we do is we ask ourselves questions to increase our self-efficacy. So very often we ask ourselves why questions. Why did that happen to me? But this strategy challenges you to take those why questions and turn them into how or what questions instead. So what's an example of this? Well, one example might be, why is my boss so mean? And instead of wondering why our boss is so mean, we could take it on ourselves and make ourselves accountable. We can say, how can I be more effective with my boss? Or if we say, why didn't I get that promotion? We can ask ourselves, what can I do to get that promotion? It's that switch in the mindset, going from why questions to how or what questions. Our last piece, the pie, so to speak, of resilience is connection. And Dr. Jack Shonkoff from the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University says the following: there is always an adult or more than one adult who is key to providing that relationship that helps to build resilience. It's very true. There has to be connection. And for children, as adults, we have to make that connection for them. There's actually been a lot of research on infants and resiliency. And one of the findings, major findings of that, is children who feel safe with caregivers are more resilient later in life. And these caregivers don't just have to be parents. They can be any adult that appears and shows up regularly and consistently in a child's life. So just like we need to be the connectors for children, we also need to be the connectors for ourselves and other adults. What happens during adversity is that many people can self-isolate, and this is counterproductive to resiliency. And it's a very natural response to self-isolate when you're faced with adversity or trauma, because a lot of people don't want to reach out and bother other people when they're feeling down. They don't want to be a downer. But for these people in these moments especially, it's important to be aware that connecting with others can actually help you get through the adversity. It can cause you to be more resilient in the end. And you can even grow and learn from the experience through connection. So what are some things that we can do to connect with others? Well, during this time, to connect with students, we can send them personalized email messages. We can have daily morning meetings as a check-in. To connect with parents or guardians, we can create a web page or a newsletter with resources for self-care. We can also make a video of teachers and staff wishing parents and guardians and students well, because we're so separated right now. Let them see our faces. To connect with colleagues, we can have virtual lunch meetings or happy hours. I know that's happening all around the state. Or we could share jokes with each other. To connect with family and friends, we can FaceTime or Zoom, especially with family members or friends who live alone. That's very helpful. We can also attend virtual religious services just to feel a part of the community, to feel a part of something. These are just some ideas that have come through at our interactive webinars on how to create connections. So let's go into our next piece. Our next piece is thinking traps. So what are thinking traps? These are cognitive distortions where our mind convinces us of one thing when in reality it's completely untrue. These inaccurate thoughts are usually used to reinforce negative thinking patterns. Thinking traps actually block our ability to be resilient. It's all or nothing thinking, thinking of only the positive outcomes, only of the possible outcomes at either extreme, really good or really bad, and not seeing any of the possible outcomes in between. Again, this thinking trap and all thinking traps are connected to self-awareness. There's a lot of thinking traps out there, but I'm going to share with you 4 most common thinking traps that people fall into. And all of these can really prevent resilience. So the first one I want to talk to you about is the mind reading thinking trap. This is assuming you know what another person is thinking, which is often negative, or another person to know what you are thinking. And the effect of this mind reading thinking trap is that it blocks communication, because you already think and assume that another person knows what you think, or you assume that you know what another person is thinking. So it blocks that communication. It prevents it from happening because you're not talking, you're just making assumptions. So how do you get out of this trap? That first one is perspective taking again. Perspective taking is a huge part of resilience. It's a huge part of conflict resolution. It's a huge part of anti-bias education in general. So the first thing is perspective taking and really trying to understand where that other person is coming from. And that can help you to get out of this trap. The second way is to ask. Ask instead of assume. We assume so often, but have that communication and actually ask the question. The third is to communicate clearly and accurately. So what do I mean by that? Well, very often we communicate via text or email. And when we lose that face-to-face communication, people can really assume tone and intention because they've lost that facial expression and that sound. And I'm sure that this has happened to you at some point, because I know it has happened to me. And one of the things we can do is we can really stop ourselves and make sure we're communicating clearly and accurately. What do we do to communicate? How do we communicate? And how can we best do it to avoid this mind reading thinking trap? The next thinking trap I want to talk about is the me or them thinking trap. So this is the trap where if you're in the me part, you believe that you are the sole cause of every setback or problem that is out there. And if you're in the them thinking trap, you believe that everyone else is the sole cause or the sole problem of whatever the issue is. So this thinking trap is having the blame lie completely on yourself or completely on another person. So the effect of the me thinking trap is it leads to guilt and disappointment in yourself. It could also make you feel very isolated and depressed. And the effect of the them thinking trap is that it can lead to feeling anger and aggression. So how do you get out of these thinking traps? Again, the first piece is perspective taking. You have to be able to balance the criticism of others and balance the criticism you're having of yourself. We can often be our own worst critic. The second piece is asking yourself the question, what else could be true other than what I am thinking? I know when this hard time started, I was really in the them thinking trap, and I was really getting frustrated with my family because of the dishes. And there were just so many dishes, and all four of us are now eating every single meal in the house. And I was feeling like, what is wrong with them? Why can't they do their dishes? Why am I always doing the dishes? Yeah, I was just getting really, really stuck in that them thinking trap. So I decided to take my own advice and ask, well, what else could be true other than what I am thinking? And what I realized is I always do the dishes. And usually it's not so many, so it's not so upsetting to me because I happen to think I do them the best. But I realized like maybe they don't even think about the dishes. Maybe they don't even realize about the dishes. So we sat down, we talked about it, we came up with a whole dishes plan, and now things are a little bit better. We're still working on it. It's a work in progress, but at least I'm not in that them thinking trap, like what is wrong with them? And, I'm not just like in my own head about it. So it is really helpful to ask yourself the question, what else could be true other than what I am thinking? The next thinking trap is the helplessness thinking trap. And this is when you believe that the negative event will impact all areas of your life and you have absolutely no control. The effect of falling into this thinking trap is passivity. You can give up, you can feel depressed, you can have less energy, you can feel unmotivated. And this thinking trap is very, very difficult to be in because you feel this helplessness, and helplessness can really just weigh you down. To get out of helplessness thinking trap? Wow. The first piece is connection. We can connect with people, family or friends. The next piece is identifying with things that you do have control over. Thinking about those things in your life that you can have control over and focusing on those, because helplessness is really about a lack of control. The next piece we can do is a brain dump. Get all of those thoughts that you have in your head out. And for some people, this is crucial. Journaling or just writing it down. I know if I wake up in the middle of the night and I have a million thoughts in my head, I'll sometimes text myself or email myself and it instantly leaves my head. So this whole idea of a brain dump can be very helpful. And the last thing I want to talk about is changing your routine. Taking yourself out of the wheel that we run on in our own mind, and doing that in ways that we can control. So maybe making a new meal, trying some new food, doing some different form of exercise. This proves to yourself that you do actually have control over something. The last thinking trap I want to talk about today is catastrophizing. And this thinking trap causes you to waste critical energy ruminating on the irrational worst case outcome of a situation. And doing this actually blocks you from taking action. This trap also causes you to underestimate your ability to cope with adversity. And the effect of this is agitation and anxiety and inability to focus. But there's also other effects that can be physical, like headaches and stomach aches and sweating. And what can you do to catastrophize? Especially right now, there's just so much going on in our minds where we're thinking of this worst case scenario. So what can you do about catastrophizing too much? Karen Ravitch, great technique called challenging catastrophic thinking. And what you do, it's a cognitive strategy, can help you to get out of this thinking trap. And what you do is you of a scenario. Okay, so let's say our scenario is going to be that we have to give a presentation and we're really stressed. And actually, according to research, death is actually the second biggest fear, because the number one biggest fear is public speaking. So this is actually something that a lot of people have catastrophized about, is making a presentation. So the first step is you think of the worst case scenario. What is the worst thing that could happen? And you get that all out. And so, for example, in this situation, you're going to freeze in front of the group, or maybe you're going to forget your speech and not be able to talk. And if anyone watches This Is Us, Randall and Beth do this all the time. Start talking and they say, okay, when one of them is stressing, the other one will say, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then they do it. They like go through this whole process. So that's the first step. The second step is you think of the best thing that could happen. Okay, you want to generate some positive emotions to relieve that anxiety a bit. So what's the best thing that could happen is, in this presentation, is you could like rock it and you could get a standing ovation. Someone could film it and post it online and it could go viral. Like, these are the best case scenarios, right? Well, for some people, not everyone would want that, but for some. Okay, the third step is to think of the probables. What do you think is probably going to happen? Okay, so probably maybe I'm going to start sweating before I speak, or maybe it's going to start to shake. Those are the probables. That could probably happen. And then step 4 is the action. So you take up, for each of those probables, you come up with an action to handle that issue so that you feel more prepared. So for example, if you're worried about sweating, make sure you wear something light or that doesn't show sweat stains, or you wear layers so that you can address that probable. If you're worried about your voice shaking, you take a deep breath. I know for me, sometimes when I get nervous, which definitely happens to everybody, when I get nervous, I'll do some breathing exercises. And then if I'm at a podium, I'll hold on to the podium really tight. I feel like all the aggression goes out through my hands. So it helps me to just relax and get through the presentation. The truth of catastrophizing is that reality usually lies somewhere in between the worst case and the best case. So when we take these steps and we work through them, it can really help us to get through this thinking trap and to be more resilient. I want to acknowledge that there is a lot of content we are receiving right now. It's in our inboxes, it comes at us from the news, it's in articles and videos online, and it's all about how to cope during these stressful times. There was a recent article that I got from the Washington Post called "A Psychologist's Science-Based Tips for Emotional Resilience During the Coronavirus Crisis," and I really liked the tips that she gave. So I'm going to share some with you. And the first one is, we can accept our negative emotions and name our feelings. We spoke about this already. Being able to label those feelings can really help us and others get through difficult times. The second one is we can create schedules to get ourselves through the days. It's about that feeling of control. And when we have a schedule, it helps us to maintain that control in our lives. And sometimes the schedules change. And sometimes when things are normal and not stressful, schedules change. So just being able to be flexible to change those schedules if need be. The next thing we can do is take some time to try some new things we've always wanted to try. There's definitely people who are taking lessons online, music lessons. I've heard people of taking music lessons online. I've even heard of people getting really into baking bread, and that there's even been a shortage of flour and yeast. So that's another interesting thing that I've heard lately. The next thing is, to keep our emotional well-being in a positive place, we need to exercise and eat right. Exercise and eating right and taking care of our body is really attached to well-being and positivity. So let's just remember to do those things. I know a lot of people already do that in stressful times, so let's just keep that in the forefront of our mind. We can also socialize with people over the phone and on Zoom calls and FaceTime, and that's definitely a way to create that connection that we were talking about that's so important to resilience. And last, we can take an opportunity to connect with those we are stuck with or quarantined with, or we are just with. Sometimes I'm feeling a little bit stuck. That's why I wrote that word. But I am with my family, and I have really been enjoying our family meals because my husband works in New York City, and we usually do not get a chance to eat together. And I've been really enjoying eating together. I've really even been enjoying preparing the meals to eat together. It's very bonding, and we end up sitting at the table and chatting and talking, and it's been really, really wonderful. I want to thank you for watching this webinar. As I mentioned, there's so much content out right now, and I just want to thank you for choosing our content at the Bar Foundation. And for a more comprehensive look at this material, please register for one of our upcoming interactive webinars. All new dates and times are released through our email distribution link. You can click here to sign up for educator emails on our SEL webinar and online content page on our website at www.njsbf.org. Thank you, be well, and I hope to see you soon in person.